Well, welcome back to our final week in the study of James. This week, Christie and I will be taking a look at chapter 5 of James, and the title is The Rich and Poor. And you know, this week, Christie, James really speaks out about the economic inequality that certainly was very much a part of the early church. Let's take a look at the first 6 verses of James chapter 5. Come now, you rich people, weep and wail for the miseries that are coming to you. Your riches have rotted and your clothes are moth-eaten. Your gold and silver have rusted, and their rust will be evidence against you, and it will eat your flesh like fire. You have laid up treasure for the last days. Listen, the wages of the laborers who mowed your fields, which you kept back by fraud, cry out, and the cries of the harvesters have reached the ears of the Lord of hosts. You have lived on the earth in luxury and in pleasure. You have fattened your hearts in a day of slaughter. You have condemned and murdered the righteous one who does not resist you. Well, some pretty good allegations against the rich folks there. What do you think there, Christie?
It certainly would make someone think twice about being rich, because James really does not have any kind words to say whatsoever about being rich, and has a lot of warnings, especially about sort of hoarding up your treasures here on earth versus certainly in heaven, as we other scriptures before. But he really just has no empathy whatsoever here for the rich. And, you know, it's interesting to me that I question, you know, is he really talking about just people with wealth here, or is he talking about people who just mistreat other people because they
right.
because they're in a position of power to do that? And I can't help but to think that there's even some of that going on with all of this. But anyway, it really does lend itself to think about, you know, what are our attitudes about our own wealth, and what are the church's attitudes about wealth? So what do you think of that question, Joe?
Yeah, no, I think, I think we think about this particular day, going back at the historical setting. You know, I think this was about rich landowners, and this was about small farmers, and I think it was about how the farmers were being squeezed out, and it was about how the wealthy kept getting wealthier and the poor kept getting poorer, and I think it was definitely about economic inequality. But I kind of like what you're talking about. You know, I think that Jesus in Matthew 6, he talked about storing up, you know, treasures in heaven versus the temporal treasures that we store up on earth. And we see James is literally quoting his brother here by talking about that, starting in verse 2 with, you know, talking about the clothes being moth-eating, and, you know, the precious metals rusting and that type thing. So, you know, I think this for us, I think getting away from the historical perspective and saying, okay, what does this mean for us as modern day believers today? You know, I think you can get caught up in this being just about money and economics and wealth, and forget that this is really about, you know, being blessed and what in the challenges. You know, Jesus never said there was anything wrong with making money or saving money. What he said was there's something wrong if it becomes your God. You know, if you allow it to control your life, and if you put your faith in your own abilities and what you can do. And sometimes we assume that the blessings that we have, we earn. You know, you can get in that arrogance about how self-sufficient we are. And so, you know, listen, Jesus never said there's anything wrong with wealth. He just said that what's wrong is if we let it control us. And there's pretty good indication here, isn't there, Christie, that people were being controlled by their wealth. I mean, do you see some specific allegations here about how wealth was controlling them?
Sure, especially when it talks about you have condemned and murdered the righteous one who does not resist you. And in other words, you've gone and maybe you haven't paid someone for the work that they've done, and you're hoarding it back for you. You're doing things by fraud, and that's not a good thing. And so selfishness comes into that.
Mm-hmm.
They're almost treating, like you said, you're talking about the landowners. They're almost treating everything they've acquired as, okay, I own this. This is mine, with no mention of the fact that God owns everything and gave them the ability to have that land. And it just seems to me that they are really forgetting the eternal piece of this, Joe, and they're focused on the here and now and the temporary kinds of things. And how is that sort of applicable to us? I mean, to me, he references hoarding a lot here, hoarding back, whether it's your time, your talents, your money, whatever. But I think of something as simplistic as how many pairs of shoes I have in my closet. Knowing that I can only wear one pair of shoes at a time and probably don't need all those shoes that I have. But at what point do I give them away? And the other piece of it is, I know he mentions material things here. You know, when people pass away, what happens to all those material things?
Right. No, that's a good point.
Well, we haven't discussed the church. What about the church? What do we think about the church's view on wealth?
Well, not only that, but the church has, church certainly has some responsibilities. When I read that you have lived on earth in luxury and in pleasure, and you fatten your hearts, I can't help but to think about how blessed, like our church, Christie, has been. I mean, we have had nothing but blessings on this church for many, many years. And, I think that can become a challenge for us, because I think that we can get very inner focused and forget that our mission is to share Christ with all people. Right. And we can forget about that. We can get into building up. Listen, we have a beautiful new building where we get to, have Sunday school every week, and a fellowship hall for our Wednesday nights. And, and we have to just be very careful that we don't allow that to in some way cause us to put our treasures here on earth. And so I think it's a constant challenge. So I think it's a challenge for us as individuals, but I think it's also a challenge as a church to not lose focus of what is the real mission of the church. And it's really not for us to live in luxury and pleasure and to fatten our hearts. Right. It really isn't. Now, look at verses 7 through 11, Christy. Talk to us about that a little bit.
Yeah, let me read verses 7 through 11. Be patient, therefore, beloved, until the coming of the Lord. The farmer waits for the precious crop from the earth, being patient with it until it receives the early and late rains. You also must strengthen your heart, for the coming of the Lord is near. Beloved, do not grumble against one another, so that you may not be judged. See, the judge is standing at the doors. As an example of suffering and patience, beloved, take the prophets who spoke in the name of the Lord. Indeed, we call blessed those who show endurance. We have heard of the endurance of Job, and we have seen the purpose of the Lord, how the Lord is compassionate and merciful. Wow. I think one of the first things that hits me after I read that, Joe, is just that first word, or first couple of words, be patient. And who is he talking to? This sort of goes back to your historical perspective of, he's talking to those fellow believers, those believers who thought that Jesus was coming at the end of the week. And he's saying, be very patient, because he is coming back. But he's also saying, don't be focused on these temporary things. You need to be focused on those eternal things. And he uses that metaphor of a farmer. So just like when you have a farmer who goes and plants a crop, and you start out with a seed, and you have to nurture, water it, watch it grow, and it takes patience. and he refers to the early rains and the late rains. And you have to wait for rain to come so that it can grow. So I love that analogy that he uses, or the metaphor that he uses with the farm. And he says to us again, be patient and strengthen your heart. And how do we do that? Well, there are a lot of ways. Last week we talked about drawing nearer to God, and we do that through prayer. We do it through our relationships with other people. But this whole piece of strengthen your heart. What if I don't have patience? What do I do? Well, we're called to actually ask God for patience, and we can do that. We should be asking along the way for patience when we don't have it. I know that's something that I have to work on constantly, and patience is one of those fruits of the Spirit, and it's something that we have to work on. And then in verse 9, he goes back to those practical things again. Don't grumble against each other, because then you're going to start acting like judge and jury, and we all know that there's only one judge along the way. And then he references the people who have endured, and he talks about prophets. And we all know that, they endured a lot of different things as they were out trying to spread good news and certainly talking about what faith was and how people ridiculed them, Joe, but they stayed at it. They persevered. And you heard the saying of, you've got the patience of Job, and we can't leave him out. And he was certainly showed a great example of endurance, because he had so many things that happened to him, and he just stuck with it and stuck with it and stuck with it. And then I think the ultimate example is certainly the example of God. I mean, think about that. God gets disobeyed, ignored, mistreated, even cursed, but he continues to be compassionate and merciful, and he shows us grace. And sometimes honestly, we're the people who do these things. And he still is merciful and just bestows unlimited grace on us. And so patience and persistence and endurance, I think those are what he's saying to everyone, not just the poor that we think it's referenced here in the scripture. I think he's talking about all believers. If you've got patience and persistence and some of that unwavering faith, then you're going to make it, even through the good times and through the bad times. And there are going to be times when you're both rich in life and you're poor in life. It just depends on what your measuring stick is. What about you, Joe?
Yeah, I think, my final thought was that, it's interesting when James wrote this, he was writing it feels like to me he was writing to two groups of people. He was writing to the wealthy landowners, and he was saying, hey, beware, yours is coming. And then he was writing to, the people in the church who were really the poor. And he was saying, be patient, like you said there. He was writing to them. But as I read this week, it just kind of dawns on me that, really for us as moderns, as we read this, there's really a message on both ends of that, because we can be both rich and poor, Christie, at the same time.
You're right.
In any given day, week, month, whatever it might be, there are parts of our life that are rich, and there are parts of our life that are so blessed. And sometimes we can be absolute jerks because our life is working well. And at the same time, there can be parts of our life where we really are poor in spirit for sure. Maybe it's a health issue, maybe it's a relationship issue, maybe it's actually a money issue, an economic issue, maybe we lost our job. So we can relate to both ends of the spectrum. And so there's a word here for both of us, and it's, God never said that there was anything, the Bible doesn't tell us there's anything wrong with being blessed, whether that be with,
right.
Economics, relationships, whatever.
Right.
Nobody ever gets in trouble because they were, they worked hard. Matter of fact, there's a lot of sayings in the Bible that point to the fact that, we're called to do our very best, work as if we're working for the Lord, right? So
Right.
I don't think there's anything wrong with that, but there is something wrong with, kind of looking at that as being for our own benefit and taking credit in an arrogant sort of way, and it basically separates us from God. By the same token, when we're living through the difficult times, like he talked about in an earlier chapter, we have a tendency to want to point fingers at people and to blame others, and we grumble, as he talks about. We can all relate to that, and we exhibit anything but patience.
Mm-hmm.
I love the idea. You touched on it, but my last thought I just want to close on is, he says, be patient, verse 7, be patient, therefore, beloved, until the coming of the Lord. Well, for him, he was Jesus' brother. It's been 40 years now, and he's expecting Jesus to show back up any day. The people expected that. And they were to live their lives as if he was coming back and would right all inequality. They weren't to take judgment into their own hands, because Jesus was going to take care of all that. And I was just struck by that this week. Do I really live with a sense of hope and confidence that I don't need to worry about who's keeping score around here? Jesus is coming back at some point. It's going to straighten it all out. And I probably don't, is the truth of the matter. I probably don't think about that. But that was the motivation he was saying for these people to be patient, was because the coming of the Lord, the day will come when everything will be set right. And, we need to live as if we believe that, Christie. We need to not worry about who's got what we don't have. And we certainly don't need to have arrogant attitudes about being blessed. But we need to live as if the day of the Lord is going to come back, and like we really believe that. So for me, this was a lesson about really attitudes with others, regardless of what our circumstance is, blessed or not so blessed. We still have a responsibility to live out our faith and our relationships with each other and with God.
I agree, totally. And I think for me, Joe, I agree with everything you say. I probably don't get up every morning and approach life as, okay, the Lord's coming, and what am I doing today to that faithfulness and hope that I have? I need to do a better job of that. I think for me also in verse 8, where he says, you also must be patient, strengthen your heart. And I need to be asking myself every day, how am I strengthening my heart? All these blessings that I have, how am I strengthening my heart? How am I sharing that with others? How am I treating others every day? Are they seeing the best version of me? Are they seeing the best version of God through me? And again, it's not about bank accounts at this point. I think it really is about how we're interacting and sharing our blessings with other people, and are we preparing for that day when the Lord is going to come again?
Well said. Well said. Well, Christie, I've enjoyed doing these lessons with you this month. This has been a fun conversation, and look forward to doing it again in the future. And, it's interesting. It's just a segue to close today. I was looking ahead to Principles of Stewardship, which is our next month's lessons. And we're going to start right out with Matthew 6:19. Do not store up for yourself treasures on earth. That's the very first verse of our new unit. So we segue very well from chapter 5 of James. And next week we'll be talking about, do I serve wealth or does it serve me? Well, thank you all for being here and watching this week. I hope this has been a blessing to you. Hope that you have a great week. God bless you. We'll see you again next week. Thanks.